you so much for coming today. My name is Kate Paisani and I work at Carla, and I'm happy to welcome you to the first of our lunchtime presentation series this semester. Before I introduce our speakers, I just want to point out to you that we have a number of other talks scheduled this semester, and you can see them all on the slide. To be able to attend, you will need to register. Karen has just put the registration link in, or the information about our presentation series in the chat. And from there, you can register for each talk. It's a separate Zoom link for each one, so you do need to register for each one individually. We are this semester highlighting the work of graduate research assistants who have worked either on their own research projects or who have worked on the research project of a faculty member. And so you can see that in the list of presentations. I do want to point out that we have one invited presentation, like special invited presentation this semester from Kristen Davin, who is an internationally known scholar on many topics, but is currently working on the state seals of biliteracy. And that's an initiative that we are supporting here at Carla. And so she'll be speaking about her work on that. We will be leaving the chat open during the talk today. So if you have questions for our speakers, please add them to the chat, and then I will facilitate the Q&A at the end of the presentation. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce Emma Reeder, who is a PhD student in Hispanic linguistics here at the University of Minnesota, and Amanda Dalola, who is a faculty member in linguistics and the director of the Language Center at the University of Minnesota. Emma was one of the graduate research assistants that Carla funded over the summer, and she worked with Amanda on the project that they're going to be presenting today, which is titled Voices of Belonging, Video Archive of Heritage Language Narratives in Minnesota. So take it away, Emma and Amanda.
Thanks, Kay, for that introduction. Thanks, everyone, for joining us. We're really excited to share our project. Go to the next slide. So what we're talking about here is a video archive that's specifically focused on heritage speakers and heritage learners in the local context, which is the Twin Cities in the state of Minnesota. And so we'll take you a little bit through our workflow that we followed as we put it together. So we'll talk first about the background, like what was the need that presented that made us want to make a project of this sort. And then we'll talk about the research that we did. We're not surprisingly or unsurprisingly the first to come upon the idea of a video archive for inspiring and helping people use their heritage language. And so we'll look a little bit at the different models we examined to get to our own design, which we'll talk about next. And then we'll talk about the interview protocol that we came up with. Specifically, what did we want our people to talk about when they were sharing their stories. And so we did a lot of kind of background information to figure out what makes for a good story, what makes for a good narrative, but then also what is compelling for a heritage learner of a language. We'll share with you some recordings from our pilot, and then at the end, we'll give you our timeline. This project is still very much in motion, and so you'll get to see where we are and where we're headed. So the background is, so we're in a situation of wanting to both represent and inspire learners of heritage languages. We have many heritage language communities here in the Twin Cities, and we see many of those students and learners at the university where we work. But we know that the sort of art of inspiring and working with heritage learners is somewhat different from second language learners. In particular, heritage learners face a lot of tension between their lived experiences and then what you would find in a more prescriptive, formal class situation. Oftentimes, their family experience or their community knowledge isn't valued or focused on informal education, and this can cause them to become disengaged or to fall out entirely from studying their language. We know from looking at heritage language approaches to teaching learners of these languages that to be successful, what you really want to do is recognize what they bring to the table, their cultural repertoires, their linguistic experience, rather than subordinating them to kind of the prescriptive versions of the language. And we think, and we thought, and we continue to think that one of the ways to really do that in a validating way is to go through the lens of personal storytelling. What this does is kind of recognize them for their own lived experiences, but then also puts them in the position to use a language and to talk, reflect cognitively about like what is the experience they've had as a multicultural and a multilinguistic user. This is, again, something that's been done before. We looked a lot at digital archives and corpora. And so this can be an attractive model for this particular kind of instruction. Emma will talk a little bit later about the different models we looked at, but when you have digital archives of this sort that are personal because they involve individuals and their experiences, what you actually are doing is creating legitimized resources that counter these reductive representations that you get in more commercial things like textbooks and what have you. So you really are giving a legitimization to your heritage learner community by showing them, look, your experience is so valuable to us that we would create databases out of it, and other people like you would sort of hear your story on their own quest to understand themselves better. So what this project proposes is a multilingual, we'll talk a little bit about how code switching plays into this, a multilingual storytelling archive. What we're hoping that it can do is encourage, enhance engagement for heritage learners of their languages. We want to provide a legitimizing aspect of their identities, but then we're also hoping as language teachers and administrators that we can support their long-term retention through the programs because we want to see them use their languages in ways that are meaningful to them. What we're responding to with this project is really a pedagogical need for what we call a human-centered tool. It's sometimes hard to mediate that through screens, but what we're hoping to do here is really bring faces to the forefront, lived experiences, and help people be inspired by one another through that. There are lots of archives that we'll talk about. StoryCorps is probably the most well-known, which invites you to tell your story through a phone app, so you can kind of take it with you everywhere, and then add pictures later. We'll talk about SpinTX, which was created at the University of Texas at Austin, SPIN standing for Spanish in Texas. These are really valuable resources, and in some cases they do target learners of a second language, but they aren't necessarily set up for integration into a heritage language classroom. So that's really something that we wanted to kind of do or take a little further with our own project. We're really hoping that what we can do here is provide pedagogically usable, authentic materials, but then that also feed this larger process of open educational practices where, we can create this kind of starter set of narratives. And then as we have heritage learners engaging with the database, they themselves can feed into that by contributing their own narratives. So we're hoping that this can be a larger open educational practice that can continue to sustain itself over time.
Excuse me. Hi, everyone. Thanks for coming. I'm going to talk a little bit about our inspiration and the research that we did on other databases to kind of get a feel for what kind of database, what ours might look like or what ideas might be out there. So I went and looked at various databases. Some of the key ones are on the right here. And I'll talk about those in just a minute. But I went and I watched different videos. I saw what themes they had. I saw what features their website had. And I noted down which one seemed most useful. I kind of cataloged a lot of different things and kind of pulled out which were most common, which seemed the best to use in ours. So we really kind of looked at all these other prior databases that have come before us to kind of stand on their shoulders, So we also got some pedagogy ideas from some of the websites. Some of them have like lesson plans or curriculums, textbooks, etc. And so we use those as well as a starting point. So some of the key databases that we looked at, SpinTX, of course, which is pretty similar to what we ended up doing, the Global Lives Project, Iowa Intersections, Lang Media, Immigrant Stories, and I'm actually going to show you a little bit about each of those. So this is actually a screenshot of the website of SpinTX, and I'm kind of going to walk you through what my research looked like here. So I looked at their topics or themes. They have all these themes here about family, food, culture, etc. They've got browse videos by speaker, and they've got this lovely about section. And those are all things that I looked at when I was looking at this. And now this is under the browse video section. You have the videos, and then you have this like filter. And you can filter by topic, speaker, region, age range, gender, countries. And then these last three, grammar, pragmatics, and functions, are more something you can focus on in the classroom that's very language related and maybe could serve a teaching function. And this is what one of the pages might look like of one video. They've got a title, which is actually a quote from the video itself. They have the name of the speaker, geographic region, country of birth, age range. And then there's this tag here of the theme, identity. And then they've got this lovely Spanish transcript. And I'm actually going to show you this clip, this video, as a kind of example for what, and we can compare it to the ones that we ended up doing. So let's play this.
¿Y tú te consideras mexicana, mexicana americana, tejana, americana?
I would say Mexican American. Solamente porque nací aquí, o sea, siempre he vivido aquí y así, pero I mean, I'm not one of those people that says like, oh, you know, I don't want to be a Mexican or anything. Like I like my Mexican culture a lot, but I mean, I've lived here all my life, so I can't say I'm Mexican when I really never even lived over there. I would want to though. Me gustaría vivir allá nomás para ir a caminar al centro.
¿Y a dónde irías a vivir en México? ¿A qué parte?
¿Cómo se? What do you say? Distrito Federal.
Distrito Federal, México DF,
Sí,
Mexico City.
Quiero ir ahí para ir a visitar la ciudad, porque me han dicho que es bien bonito ahí, y quiero ir.
Impresionante.
Sí.
Sí.
Have you
Sí, yo he ido.
I really want to go. I've heard about the churches and the museums. One day.
I stopped being full screen, I think. This video, I chose this video because part of it's got some English. The question she asked at the beginning was, about identity. Do you feel Mexican? Do you feel Mexican American? And I'm gonna slideshow again here. And you'll notice she ended up using a lot of Spanglish. And just like in SpinTX, we wanted ours to welcome mixtures of languages. And so we wanted to allow them to speak in their heritage language and or in English, and to switch between them as they feel makes sense. Because that's, I think, a very essential part of being a heritage speaker and just being bilingual in general. Here we go. So this is one of the other websites, the databases that we looked at. This one is called Immigrant Stories, and it is actually another U of M resource hosted by the U of M. And this one is looking at immigrant stories in particular in Minnesota. But instead of videos, like what we want to do, they're really doing pictures with voiceovers. And there's this cute little about section. They actually invite anyone really from the to make their own videos with pictures and voiceovers and share those about their immigrant story, more of a biography of sorts. Now, the Global Lives Project was really interesting. Each of these pictures here is its own little video, and the Global Lives Project took 24-hour footage of people, like just days in the life of different people around the world, and they shortened them into like watchable clips. This is an example of one of them, what the page might look like. Similar to the last resource, it's got some basic information, for example, occupation, date of birth, religion, income, and a little biography. So it's similar, but it's also got a little bit different information. And my favorite part about the Global Lives Project was they have this curriculum, and this is a completely free resource. You can go onto their website and put your email, your name, and they'll send you the PDF form of this curriculum, which is really great. It's called Unheard Stories, and it is a curriculum based on empathy. It's called Building Empathy Through the Global Lives Project. And this is kind of an excerpt of one of those pages from one of the lessons. So this lesson is about, it's called Who Am I? It explores the multidimensionality of identity. And so they are kind of reflecting on their own identities and the identities of the videos from the Global Lives Project. And you can see they've got lots of information here: goals, overview, assessment, duration, materials. And it's more than one page per lesson, but there's a lot of really great resources in there that we used kind of as a basis for our pedagogy ideas as well. This one is Iowa intersections. This is the last one I'll talk about. This one does something similar to what we're doing, but they are looking at immigrant stories and we are looking at heritage speakers, and they're in Iowa, we're in Minnesota, but we're both looking at kind of this mixture of culture, in this area, and we're both doing it with video and potentially in various different languages. So this is their homepage. They've got a featured story, an about, main menu, and then they've also got this browse function, which we really liked. You can browse by the language that the video's in. Just like us, they're looking at multiple different languages, and then browse by country that they're from, project, etc. And this is what one of the videos might look like. This isn't the featured, this is the page of where this video lives. And if you click on this video, or if you clicked onto the featured page, it'll take you to this page, which has tags, which are really the themes, the language, country, and project. And you can even search like right on the right here. So those are some of the features that I looked at. I just kind of took you through my research process over the summer of what I was looking at when I was looking at all these different databases, and really all of our ideas came from these great databases that came before us. So I'll pass it over to Amanda to talk about the design now.
Yeah, so as you can see, I mean, so we just given you sort of the top 5. We had a lot to kind of work from. There were a lot of really compelling, exciting databases out there, and we wanted to figure out in what ways should ours reflect similar features, and in what ways should they go in a different direction. And so we decided that the design principles we wanted to follow were really those of user accessibility. So for the person who's interfacing with the file, searchability, and that's sort of on like both sides of the equation, both for the learner and for the instructor, and then also their ability to be integrated into a language curriculum, particular heritage language curriculum. We talk a lot about plug and play ability. It's a lot easier to kind of find a compelling video in a resource like this and try it out, rather than to kind of redo the curriculum with this in it and then sort of go from there. So we want these to be modular, easy to integrate, but then in order to do that, you have to tag it with certain things. So our core features include things like we wanted an about page. We want to talk a lot about our mission statement, in particular what makes our database different. Like a lot of them is that we have sort of a local call. We're really hoping to, I guess, resonate with our local communities, bring them representation, but then also in our local context of teaching at the University of Minnesota, we want this to be relevant for heritage learners. This is going to be an open educational resource, and that's how we've intended it. So our Creative Commons license needs to be present. And so to that effect, we didn't want to complicate the user interface with anything more than kind of a simple navigation. We wanted quick keyword access. So if you wanted to search by a word like heritage or family, that would be possible. But then we also wanted like a 1-sentence preview. So let's say you searched by heritage and then like all of these videos and blurbs came up. Like, what is a 1-sentence summary or preview of that? So you can get a sense going into it of, what is this about? What is the language like? Is it mixed? Things like that. More specifically, dealing with the linguistic side of it, because we are looking at particular language learners and language teachers, we wanted to include features and functions that would allow people to control for the things that they might need to control if they wanted to integrate this in thematic ways, and that would also kind of assist learners who are getting input in a variety of modalities. So to that extent, the transcript portion is important. As we saw with the example of SpinTX, many of our heritage learners use multiple languages with great ease. And so we can't necessarily rely on something like YouTube, where the video is hosted, or Cultura, to generate an automated transcript, because the technology that generates those captions automatically is only listening for one language. So if you had a recording like we showed you where the speaker was using both English and Spanish, you could tell it to generate a transcript in English or in Spanish, but it wouldn't be able to handle the bilingual or in some cases multilingual context very well. So that makes things a little harder on our end because we have to generate transcripts and then go back and edit them manually. But we thought that the benefit of having that kind of written document available for users when they're using this kind of tool far outweighed the labor that it would be for us to kind of edit those things manually. So we really want to push also this notion of translanguaging, which gets some playtime in second language courses, but is incredibly essential in heritage language setting. Translanguaging meaning like the supporting of people using multiple languages in the class with the same fluidity that we saw the presenter answering questions and moving from one topic to a next in one language or another. We also want to kind of set the tone for language instructors and heritage learners in those settings that this is realistic behavior, this is acceptable behavior, this is to be valued. And in a lot of ways, it's a reflection of the kinds of language choice that you make all the time as a heritage learner. It's not necessarily reflective of some kind of deficit on your behalf. And so we want to kind of position, even in the way that we support our tool, the idea that translanguaging is a benefit. The captions are great. They improve accessibility, and that can be an issue for playback and things like that. We wanted the transcripts to go with the captions because, as we said before, the captions aren't always reliable when you have multiple codes. We also wanted to tag for all kinds of meaningful information. We'll talk a little bit in our interview protocol about how we don't use learners' real names or interviewees' real names. We allow them to choose a cultural identifier that resonates with them. So searching by name isn't necessarily relevant in this case, but the ability to look at their identity, so things that might reflect on their personal experience or the way in which they were socialized into using language, or might be reflective of the way that they currently use language, things like age, gender, region, things like that. And then, of course, we wanted a thematic way to search for things. We added this grammar component where, let's say, for instance, you were focusing on a certain structure. We're going to look at sequencing, or we're going to look at coordinating conjunctions, or we're going to look at past tense. We wanted the people who were kind of building the lesson plans to be able to go in and get exactly what they were looking for if there was a form search term that needed to be respected. So we ended up adding that. We didn't consider it at first because we didn't want it to be overly grammatical, but we thought that it could be helpful when you're working on certain functionalities like narration, comparison, stuff like that. So after we looked at the design that we were looking for, we really wanted to spend a lot of attention on what were we going to actually ask people who were interviewed for the database. So you could have a really splashy website, but if you don't ask good questions, you don't have good narrations. And so we spent a lot of time studying interview protocol to try to come up with a method that would both give interviewees enough space to tell their story without them being too confined, but then also give them enough scaffolding to find a story that's compelling. They may not be in the situation to tell big stories about their lives all the time. And so it requires a little bit of encouragement of reflection and kind of getting to a theme and then kind of dancing around it until they find something that's adjacent to that theme, or maybe in some cases on the theme itself, that is a compelling story. So we, in addition to the research that Emma did looking at all of the databases that came before us, we also looked at the kinds of questions that they asked. We looked at how they asked them. We looked at, like, was the interviewer using certain languages when they were doing it? Was the interviewer using certain constructions? And so the themes that came up time and time again, the kind of rang true for getting good narratives out of speakers were around these 10 topics. So our interview protocol ended up having 10 themes. And we'll give you an example in some following slides, but those themes included things like childhood and home life, family, school, values like cultural values, religion and spirituality, food, of course, heritage identity was a big one, and then challenges and resilience. We weren't sure at the outset about that category, but in our pilot recordings, we found that it was actually a very, very rich topic. So the way that we've structured it is each of the themes has one main question. And then to get the interviewee thinking kind of in that theme, we have several follow-up questions that kind of dance around that main theme that are more specific, they're more discrete, they're more tangible. And so people can identify with that and maybe tell like a smaller story about that particular theme. So we'll give you an example here. So our question about heritage identity, the main question is, how do you feel about your heritage, language, and culture? So that's a big question. People may be able to engage with that. And, we've certainly seen that as the case. But in some cases, they're looking for something a little more concrete to engage with. And so then the follow-up questions that they can consider, if that one is too big, are things like, what role does language play in your identity? What was it like using your heritage language at home growing up? How comfortable do you feel speaking that language now? How do you feel when you speak your heritage language compared to English? And what do you want others to understand about your life and your background? And so the first question is good for people who maybe deal kind of in big abstract concepts, but we found that adding these more discrete focus questions can help draw a story out of a person by them responding to something that's very specific. We'll give another example here. So the challenges and resilience category, this ended up being sort of the belle of the ball in terms of our interview protocol. So the main question here is, have you ever felt caught between two cultures? Again, very general. And then the follow-ups are things like, how has your relationship with your community changed over time? Have you ever had to stand up for yourself or your family in a situation where language or culture made things difficult? And what experiences have shaped you the most? And so then you have kind of more specific questions here that are all kind of getting at this idea that you're living between cultures, and people are able to respond to them in tangible ways.
Okay, so I'm going to talk a little bit about the pilot video interview I did. The participant chose the name Coda, and he's a Vietnamese heritage speaker. So we've only done one video so far, and that's our pilot video. So I have a clip here, and this is from the theme Challenges and Resilience, as Amanda said. And the question that we asked, or that I asked him, was, have you ever had to stand up for yourself or your family in a situation where language or culture made things difficult? And let's see a little bit of this clip here.
Challenges that I've faced, I think growing up in the Midwest, where predominantly I wasn't around people like me. My high school was, very, very white. Not a lot of people of culture, of different cultures. Same going to college in a predominantly white college. I think for me, I didn't have representation of myself. I didn't have people who were like me. I think I naturally gravitated towards being, I think, more American and shedding my Vietnamese heritage because, not to say I was ashamed of it, I guess, yeah, just trying to be more American and, in a sense, lose my Vietnamese heritage. So that was hard, going back and relearning that and relearning why I did that, and, facing that head on and doing just like a deep introspection to see why I did that. And yeah, you can't change how you were, but you can grow from it and see how. And, I'm having a blast reconnecting with my Vietnamese heritage, and I'm very proud of it right now. But I can say in the past, it was hard.
So that was just a little clip of one of the excerpts from the video. And you'll notice that it's in English and not Vietnamese. And as I said, we planned to give our participants, and we gave this participant the option to do English or Vietnamese. And since I was the one interviewing him, and I'm taking a Vietnamese class, I do not yet speak Vietnamese. And so we realized it was kind of unnatural to ask someone to reply to you in questions in a language that they know you don't understand. And so that was one of our reflections, is we might want to think of ways to mitigate that or make them more comfortable speaking that language, or have someone bilingual interview, etc. So the goal is for most of these videos, at least, to be mainly in that target language or their heritage language, or at least a mixture. We don't expect most of them to be in English. But the good news is now you guys can all understand this one, which is really great. We did actually print out all those questions in Vietnamese, and I had them ready, and I could have shown him like the written question in Vietnamese or tried to pronounce it, possibly failed. And I asked him if he preferred English or Vietnamese, and he said English, and so I didn't actually end up using those, but that was kind of the backup plan for that. Although it would have made it really difficult to ask follow-up questions if I didn't know what he was saying. So that's one of our other reflections. All right, so just like the other databases, we want to include transcripts for these. And this is kind of our little transcript for part of the clip that you saw. And the ones that that learners and people looking at the database will see won't have these beautiful bolded colored letters. But I did want to point this out here. So say that we were to include this video in a lesson, we might talk about these general themes and have like students who are, especially if it's like a heritage language learner class, which for Vietnamese is like very likely, we could have them reflect on those things. So we've got not, what does it say? I wasn't around people like me. He didn't have representation of himself, kind of felt like he was losing his Vietnamese heritage. But now that he's feeling prouder. And so we might have them reflect on those main themes there. Okay, this is another video, another clip. And I do want to point out that these clips are pretty much what like someone looking at the database would see. And this is another short clip. And the theme here is heritage identity. This one's also from Coda. The question I asked was, how do you feel about your heritage language and culture? As Amanda said, that was the more broad question. We'll see what he has to say.
Right now, I'm pretty confident in my language and heritage culture. It took some time to, to relearn everything and embrace who I am as a person and just kind of shed away my old identity of being American and just American. Language plays a really big role in my identity. It's how I connect with my parents, my family, and just my community. I'd say every time I visit my parents or my family, I don't use it a lot, except when I speak to other people like myself and my family. So Vietnamese is actually my first language. When my parents immigrated here, they couldn't speak English. So me growing up, they only spoke Vietnamese to me. And as a result, I was placed in the ELL classes, or the English language learning classes, up until high school, to learn English, to catch up with my peers. And when my parents immigrated, they brought over, it's a more archaic language, if that makes sense. So they came here in the 70s, and from there they brought whatever was popular in the culture there. So in a sense, our Vietnamese was kind of stuck in the 70s, moving to a new country and not having access to, So it's a bit different. So when I say relearn Vietnamese, it's...
Okay. So that was a really cool clip, I thought. Again, I'm going to show you the excerpt here. It's talking about his confidence in his language and how that kind of has changed, the role it plays in his identity, his community, his experience learning English. And then something I've never even thought about before is he called it archaic Vietnamese, like having to keep up with the times in language. That was really interesting. And if we were to bring this into the classroom, we might ask students to reflect on their own multicultural and multilingual identities and how that kind of relates to the speaker. And we really hope this is the goal, that those learners maybe identify with or see parts of themselves or their story in those videos, or maybe can analyze, you know, similarities and differences. And I think that it would just be really meaningful for a heritage speaker to see another heritage speaker talking and be able to analyze their multilingualism. That'd be so cool. All right. Amanda will now talk about the timeline.
Yes, so this is a project that's very much in motion. So this summer we did a lot of our background research. As you saw, we looked at other databases. We also had a technical component we didn't talk about, which is figuring out the best recording setup for this kind of job. We ended up making our interview protocol, our pilot recordings, and then one of the things that we did that we haven't mentioned yet is kind of putting out feelers to reach out to make community connections in other heritage communities, and then sort of further with the ones that we already have connections to in the Language Center. This fall, we're focused on two big things. So one, we're adding to our collection of recordings. And so to do that, we, like I said, will make use of those connections. In particular, we are targeting Vietnamese, which I'll talk about in a little bit as to why, but also Somali, which we have a large local community of here in the Twin Cities, and Spanish. We're also building kind of the user interface side with Lattice, which is our college IT office. And so we're working with them right now to determine video hosting in terms of what makes the most sense in terms of the functionalities we would like. And we're designing the companion site, which will serve as the host site for the database. Altogether, it will serve as the OER. We're planning on a project launch of next spring. And at that point in time, the database will be published on the companion website, which will have a Creative Commons license. If you like that sort of thing, it's a by non-commercial share alike license. So it invites people to use it, but if they're going to share it, they need to cite the source and then share it in the same way that it was shared with them. One of the things Emma mentioned that kind of came as an offshoot as we kept working with this and all of the research we examined was the need for immediate practicality. So we love to be in the business of creating big, conceptual, lovely solutions or things that we think are going to make things better. But then everyone always says, but like, can we get a lesson plan? So one of the things that we thought about was what are some practical, maybe at the level of activities, what are some practical ways in which you could use or ask your students to interface with a database of this sort? And so what we did here was just kind of sketch out some lesson plan ideas. These aren't the full sequences, obviously, for space, but I wanted to give you an idea of what this can look like if you are focused particularly in a heritage context, or if you just want second language learners to see this kind of reflection. We have an activity here where learners create identity maps, which they can do bilingually or in the target language if you're dealing with second language learners. We have a day in the life. So Emma mentioned in the Global Lives Project that what they do is follow a person for a day. And so learners could interact with the day in the life video and then construct a visual life map for that speaker. Where does this person go? Who do they interface with? What do they say and do? This next one is about media stereotypes versus lived stories. So learners could take some kind of stereotyped image that they find in like a popular media sort, and they could actually compare it with an interview or a recording that they find in the database from that culture to see like what has been exaggerated and what is factual. My favorite is the values role play, which is where learners watch a video that has some kind of cultural values discussion. Things that have come up are things like respect for elders, hospitality, community. And then in response, they create a role play that illustrates how that value might be carried out in their own community. And then tolerance versus empathy skits, where you have learners watch a video that describes a situation of struggle, some kind of adaptation, some kind of cultural pride. And then groups do two versions of skits in response to that. One of the skits is tolerant, and then the other one needs to be empathetic to kind of emphasize like what are the differences between those two kinds of approaches to people in these settings. So I promised that I would mention to you why we have hit hard on the Vietnamese, community here, and that's because at the University of Minnesota Language Center, we have a whole Vietnamese initiative underway. And so this piece, this video archive of heritage learners is actually part of a much larger system. And so we're really grateful to have been able to develop it at this particular time. So we are gearing up right now to begin offering a 2-semester sequence that is designed for heritage learners of Vietnamese that will fulfill the language requirement. And we're hoping to start that next summer. In the development of this particular course sequence, we've created all kinds of things. One of them is a self-placement tool that allows learners to take an assessment, but it's non-binding, and it gives them a recommendation of if they should place into a second language sequence or into a heritage learner sequence. And so sometimes learners have a sense of where they belong and other times they don't. So we have this new tool. Another tool that we've created is an OER, an open educational resource that's essentially a textbook that's designed for heritage learners of Vietnamese. We've named it Bon Mi. Notice the spelling of me. It's a heritage learner's guide to Vietnamese language and multicultural identity. And we've just completed the 10-chapter draft of that, and we're now focus grouping it so that will be ready to be used in time for our course launch next summer. And then this video archive plays right into that. I mentioned earlier that we're trying to make this part of an open educational practice where we have our learners sort of use this seed material that we've created for them, but then our hope is that they will participate in it themselves by sharing their own narratives. So this is something that we're hoping can kind of down the road continue to feed itself in a sustainable way. So we want to finish here with this kind of closing comment that we got from our participant. Sometimes they catch you off guard and they give you like a really profound answer that you weren't expecting. And so the question we'd given him was, what would you like others to understand about your life and your background? And he gave exactly the answer that a language teacher would want to hear.
One thing that I want, maybe like other people learning Vietnamese, regardless of your heritage, but it's never too late to learn Vietnamese. I'm in my late 20s, and at first I thought, like, what's the point of learning a language that when I'm this old? And, I quickly found out, you're never too late to relearn any language. Just because you don't have the plasticities, the neuroplasticities that, like when you were younger, doesn't mean that you still can't learn this language. And I would highly encourage anyone who is unsure of whether or not to relearn their language or learn a language to go for it,
We didn't coach him at all. That really happened. Okay, so we have some references here that we can share with you, and then we would be really happy to take your questions. Before we do that, I want to acknowledge a bunch of groups. We have many people to thank. First, we have Carla, the Center for Advanced Research on Language Acquisition. We couldn't have done this project without their support. Same for the University of Minnesota Language Center. We have a wonderful team that we work with here. In particular, I have to thank Emily Tope, who helped a lot with the video segmentation, and then Sena Dozier, who has actually joined the project. So she'll be helping us as we continue to add voices to the database. We have our friends in Lattice, the IT group, who's helping with the website build. We also consulted with Michelle Waslin, who is responsible for the Immigrant History Resource Center database that we told you, the Immigrant Stories. We touched base with her a lot to get ideas for how that project went for them. And then we have an external shout out, which is Rachel Gilb. She works at the University of Texas at Austin, and she worked at Coral, which is the Language Resource Center at Texas, and was responsible for doing the tech design for SpinTX, the database that you saw for Spanish in Texas. So we're very grateful for all of the support we've received. This has been a labor of love for a large group of people. And now we'll take your questions.
Thanks, Emma and Amanda. So right now, all I see in the chat is a lot of kudos to you for this great project. I'm sure that some questions will come in. I have a question, and Amanda, this is related to a conversation that you and I had yesterday related to the project that you're doing in the class of mine that you're auditing. So I'm wondering about how to use these materials when you have a classroom full of different kinds of students. So let's say you don't have a dedicated heritage course, but you're teaching a class that's a mix of L2 learners and heritage language learners. How do you see using these resources in a flexible way to be meaningful to both of those groups?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think a lot of it depends on like what the level is of the second language learners and are they able to understand like a narrative that's in code switched language or that's completely in the other language. One of the things that Emma and I like are still kind of figuring out is like if when we have sort of monolingual narratives, like we have one here in English in a way that we didn't anticipate, is there some pedagogical value in inviting learners who use this material to then produce some Vietnamese version of it? We didn't want to get into the art of translation, but we thought, like in the case that you're describing, it may be that you have learners that have expertise more in, like they're more dominant in one language than the other. And we wanted to give them the linguistic flexibility to be able to interact with what's said on both sides. One of the benefits, I think, of inviting learners to do something like that is it would take a situation where you would have a learner that might be dominant in English and it would invite them to try to be as flexible in this other language that they're trying to learn more nuances about. But I think more than anything, it would provide a valuable point of reflection. So like, this is how we translated it. What comes through in the English that doesn't come through in the Vietnamese and vice versa. And so I think that could force them to like approach their bilingualism or their multilingualism in a way that is very meta, but that also lets them say, oh, we have a word for this in Vietnamese. We don't have a word for this in English or vice versa. So yeah, I mean, that's a kind of a conceptual way of dealing with the language component. But I think in terms of having mixed users, I think like second language learners would probably be drawn. I mean, they may be drawn more to issues that could connect with them as second language learners, like these questions of values and how does hospitality get translated? What does empathy look like in your culture? How do you receive people in a respectable way? I mean, these are things that kind of translate regardless of what your experience in the language is. So I guess maybe it would be building in like a flexibility of use such that not all learners have to interact with the same exact clip, but that they could choose a clip that resonates with some component of the language acquisition that works for them.
So there's a question from Mandy, and she asked about how the speakers reacted to being a part of this project. So maybe, Emma, this is a question for you since you were doing the interviews. Did they comment on how the experience of reflecting and being interviewed was for them?
Yeah, that's a interesting question. So I don't remember his exact words, but I remember he thanked me like exuberantly for like he thought it was a really interesting project, and I think that he liked that we were validating that. Um, he was really enthusiastic about it. I don't think he commented specifically on like reflections about being interviewed for him, but he was like, "Wow, this is a really great project you're doing. Like, I appreciate it so much. I hope this is helpful." So, yeah, more at the overall.
Yeah, it's kind of an interesting question because I feel like a lot of times heritage learners get marginalized in multiple ways. Like you think about, I'm thinking specifically about heritage learners of Spanish who are told that they don't speak real Spanish and they don't speak real English and they're living in this kind of liminal space. And so to have a project like this could potentially be really validating for the varieties of each language that they teach and for their sort of heritage language identities, right?
That's what we're hoping. In the Language Center, we did focus grouping specifically about Vietnamese when we were trying to figure out what would we want our course to look like and our accompanying open educational resource. And, they told us time and time again, they were interested in flexibility. They wanted to learn about different varieties of their language because maybe they didn't all speak the same variety. And so there was this question of like, if you get stuck in a class, like, yes, I'm finally learning Vietnamese, the language of my people, but then the teacher speaks a different variety and you're immediately marginalized again in a way that you didn't anticipate. That can be very upsetting and also not the goal of what we would like to do. So one of the other things that came up that really shocked me, but that I keep seeing coming up again and again, I think maybe it was my own exposure to L2 that kept me sort of not seeing this. But there was also this question of like, yeah, I use this language, it could be cool, but yeah, it's probably not a language I would go learn at a university. And so they like had kind of internalized the idea that their heritage language was not worthy of being learned in a university context. And that was shocking and outrageous in all of the right ways for us to want to say, okay, it seems like this legitimization piece is really meaningful, maybe more so than we'd anticipated. And so what you said, I hope is true. I hope that in participating in projects like this, that learners get or members of the heritage community get the message that they are worthy of being recorded for a database and that they can inspire or influence people who are just like them in their community that may be at a different inflection point in their lives and thinking, they see this clip and they think, I'm just going to go for it. That's what we're trying to do. And we realize that, we can do that as teachers, but ultimately it's better if they hear it from their peers. And so that's what we're hoping will come from this is this sense of legitimization.
There's a question from Melissa in the chat who asks, how did you find your heritage language speakers, and are you looking for only adults or are you looking at all ages? And then there was this follow-up from Mandy saying that, we'd love to have you partner with us in our heritage language learners. So maybe kind of talking a little bit about your recruitment process.
Emma, I'll let you talk about Vietnamese. I can say that our next, we have a bunch of people queued up, ready to go in Somali, and we actually called on our colleague in the Language Center for that. So Sena Dozier, who does a lot of outreach work with the Somali community through her position running the Tandem Plus program, which is a paired like the conversation partnership. So we've been able to like call on the relationships that we've built in the larger language center to make these connections and they were very enthusiastic about participating. So that's where we're headed next, at least for Somali. Emma, do you want to talk about Vietnamese?
Yes. So for Vietnamese, I really just use my personal connections. My boyfriend is Vietnamese. He's not a heritage speaker, but he's from Vietnam. And so he's very social, he befriends all these people. And so we have a mutual friend who became the participant in the pilot. And we know other people too that could be in the study. So it was really just personal connections. Yeah.
Okay, we have another question from Lisa about your sort of, I don't know, maybe epistemological or theoretical orientation. I'm trying to figure out how to frame this. Anyway, here's the question. Could you share more about the references on your slides about the types of SLA research and other domains of research that you explored to kind of frame, I'm assuming to frame the project, right?
Yeah, so I would say we kind of triangulated it, right? Because we're coming from a bunch of different sides. One of the sides that we wanted to come from was heritage language instruction. What does that look like? How is it different from second language instruction? Many of us, I think, have experience in second language instruction, given the paths that we've taken. And so we know it pretty well in some cases, but we don't necessarily always get exposure to heritage language instruction. So what are the characteristics of that? How do you reach this population that is maybe uncertain about their desire to want to continue? We also kind of added a practical component, which is that in the language center where I work, we recognize this as a need because they show up all the time and say, I would really like to be able to study my language if only that were possible. And in a lot of ways, this initiative is has been here much longer than I have. This is something that I kind of inherited here, and our team has been working dutifully on for the last 3 years. So there was a practical component too of wanting to bring this possibility to the learner by saying, you know what, you don't have to go study a well-known language. You can actually study the language you already have access in. And like, here's a way that you can use that to your benefit as you pursue your degree here in the College of Liberal Arts. The other kind of research we looked at was a lot on like user interface, like what makes a good database, what makes a compelling video. We are in the era of short form video because of social media. And so a lot of it is about kind of getting a frame without necessarily getting like a close up on the face. What do learners fixate on? What do people want to be able to search by? Also, like how many clicks should you bury something from the user? All the research shows that if you add just one more click, you're like 30% more likely to lose them. So we wanted to make the right kinds of things accessible within 2 clicks. But we also needed it to be not overwhelming as an interface. And so that's why we played a lot with user interface to try to make it usable but not overwhelming, but usable for both the user, the student who would want to interface, but then also the instructor who would want to have enough control to be able to say, I can plug this into this unit on whatever family, and I don't need to do a whole bunch of stuff in order to do that.
Right. Well, that's it for the questions from the audience. There is a resource that one of our audience members provided in the chat to help you all find some Vietnamese folks and other heritage learners who might want to be part of your project. And I'm sure you're also aware of the Heritage Language LRC at UCLA, so that's another option. So I want to thank Emma and Amanda for their really engaging and interesting talk today. There's been a lot of positive chatter in the chat. And so I think this is really going to have a great impact, and we really appreciate your work. And I want to thank all of you for attending the first Carla Talk of the semester. And we hope that we will see you at a Carla Talk later on this term. Have a great day, everybody.
Thank you.